It's rare that any animation production is afforded full, complex animation, and many of the greatest animated films have not had terribly high budgets. So when you're making animation with limited resources, there are two main solutions for keeping costs down. In the previous video I talked about how Dumbo removes detail in the design and maintained fluid animation. The other option is to use limited animation, that is to use fewer drawings in the animation process. Both approaches have their pros and cons, and it's up to the filmmakers to employ either however they want.
I'm using Perfect Blue as an example simply because it's a favourite of mine and its style and technique is pretty typical of Japanese animation of its time. It was produced with a tiny budget as a straight-to-video OVA, but due to its powerful filmmaking it was well received as a theatrical film internationally. It's a great example of economised animation as it manages to maintain storytelling at an outstanding level despite its low budget. The design of the film, especially the background, is not as wildly stylised as other animated films, and it's a pretty typical 90s anime style, although the character design style is pretty recognisable when you line it up with Satoshi Kon's other films. The design style is fairly standard and realistic, so the background artist's creative input has more in common with live action cinematography and set dressing, although with the added challenge of drawing and painting. It's a common thing in anime background design to use a lot of detail, and not to make use of loose painting. Typically you would use broader strokes as a composition technique to direct the viewer to areas of higher detail, but the heavy use of detail has a very specific effect too. Scott McCloud's book Understanding Comics describes a masking effect, where the artists use a low detail character as an avatar for the audience to project themselves onto and place them into a detailed world. The practicalities of cell animation create this effect anyway, but you can employ it in varying degrees by using less detail on a character that you want the audience to identify with, and more detail on characters that you don't. I think this is why cute characters are so successful. Perfect Blue was made in 1997, as more and more studios moved to digital colour as opposed to cells. They likely use cells in film for practical reasons, but I prefer the look. There's an unintentional texture that comes from the Xerox pencil lines, the mixed paint, the film grain, and physical light, but I think that helps hand-drawn animation, especially cheaper, limited animation. It helps to blend elements, helping to set the characters in the background and cover seams between animation layers. I think that it helps the audience's retention because it softens the image without losing detail. Large areas of flat colour can be garish or uncomfortable to look at for long periods, and a textured look can help with that. It is something that could be easily emulated digitally though, and certainly now digital traditional animation is moving more and more towards textured looks. Some long shots look a little bit weird, but I think that's more forgivable with physical media, because it's easier to tell that it's a small drawing, and it'd be less noticeable on VHS and analog TV, which is the film's intended format. Another cool thing about the use of physical film is the use of optical effects. That is, anytime something glows or is transparent, it's achieved in camera using multiple exposures. The transparent top in this shot is achieved by first shooting the scene without it, and re-exposing another pass with only the top on a black background. This creates a transparency similar to the light and blend mode in Photoshop. The glowing effect in this shot was likely achieved by first shooting the animation normally. Then they would have added another exposure with the cells lit from below like this, and put the camera out of focus like this. Dumbo sacrificed detail and maintained fluid animation. Perfect Blue does the opposite. The animation is made at a lower frame rate, allowing them to use more complex drawings. The film makes extensive use of holds, limited animation, and the pose-to-pose animation is all in 3s and 4s. There's much less use of broad animation principles. Some anime fans have criticised the neat arcs of Disney-style animation as being unrealistic and puppet-like, favouring the less fluid, realistic movement common in anime. Personally, I think that fluidity and strong gesture are some of the best reasons to do animation, but Perfect Blue contrasts both in a pretty cool way. You can see overlaps and arcs clearly in this scene because it's animated in slow motion. But throughout the film, the virtual Mima animates fluidly and elegantly, and the real Mima has much less exaggerated poses, and her realistic movement appears kind of rocky due to the low frame rate. This actually kind of suits her unstable character, and helps to show the virtual Mima as a fake character because her movement is edited and perfect. This helps to separate two characters who look and sound the same.
When she's talking in this scene, there's only really 4 drawings. There's a base cell with no mouth, and 3 separate cells with different mouth shapes, which they just alternate between for the duration of the line. This is a pretty common technique that's easy to spot, because you can see the jaw doesn't move. There are a lot of scenes like this where only one character moves at a time and the other stays on a long hold. Economy is really in action here because basically they're assuming that you'll be too distracted by the moving character to notice. But why isn't it off-putting to see so many holds? If you suddenly pause a cartoony film, it looks, well, paused and dead. I think that's because the contrast between broad animation and a hold is much greater, and we expect a simple line of action to move. The less exaggerated drawing style here, though, lends itself better to less exaggerated movement. Thanks for watching. I'm planning to do more of these videos as a series, trying to tie together the principles you read about in books with on-screen examples, as well as just highlighting films that I think have notable design and animation. Next time I'm going to be looking at a film that famously did not economise anything at all, and what you get out of it when you make a film that way.